Hi guys, and welcome to the channel. What I'm going to be doing here is just recapping some recent events, responding to some subscriber questions. I'm going to be looking at statements coming out of Downing Street, Trump's address, various news about the coronavirus, and also saying that I'm preparing I think I did mention this on my last podcast. I'm preparing an extensive vlog which will be done live, where I'm going to be looking at charts for the bubonic plague, Spanish flu, the COVID virus, and comparing them to various locations around the world. So it's going to be astrology intensive, which I know a lot of you like. No kind of political spin or anything with that one. I'm just going to be talking about how the astrology relates to pandemics in the past, how it relates to it now, what it can tell us about coronavirus. And so it'll please those of you who don't like it when I put a political spin on things, or when I criticize China, which appears to be rather controversial. What disturbs me is I was hearing from Sir Patrick Vallence, who is the Chief Scientific Advisor to the UK government. I think it's necessary to say that when you look him up on Wikipedia, it does say that he found his route to his current position via Big Pharma. So there's a question mark over anything he says. I think there's a conflict of interests. There's a question mark raised over his predisposition to Big Pharma. So he said very clearly that he is advising the government not to do a full lockdown, for example, closing down schools, as you see is happening all over Europe. In Ireland, which is our closest neighbor, you could say, in Denmark, one of our other close neighbors, in Poland, virtually all over Europe, there's a shutdown of schools. Obviously, Italy and Spain are going more so with that, with closing down bars, restaurants, pubs, movie theaters, and shops, in even the case in Italy and in Spain now, also closing shops. Denmark's got a travel ban, closed its borders. Poland's closed its borders, as has Czechoslovakia. So a lot of European countries are being more stringent. However, Sir Patrick Vallence, the UK's Chief Scientific Advisor, he says that these total shutdowns are bad because you suppress the virus, and then as soon as you lift the shutdown or relax the measures, it explodes. So if that's true, I'd like to know what his analysis of China is, because China has done a total lockdown. By all accounts, it seems to be successful. President Trump seems to think it's been successful. The mainstream media aren't particularly criticizing it. So therefore, China's experience runs totally against what this Sir Patrick Vallence is saying. So I'd like to hear his rebuff to that, unless he thinks that the Chinese measures won't work. I was looking at the Chinese experience myself, and for those of you who are China fans and criticize me for criticizing them, let's assume that they've had a wonderful strategy and it's worked. What happens now with the rest of the world exploding? It means what China is doing is they've got a quarantine. So anyone who comes from anywhere else in the world has to do a 2-week quarantine. I think that would totally put off any foreign travelers, because if you know in advance that there's no real point in going to China to do tourism or business because you're going to be subjected to this quarantine, then China are virtually cutting themselves off from the world, which I would think is going to continue to have a big impact on their business. So I think that's probably a consistent policy from China. If you shut down your country, if you've cleared up the virus, as it seems, because we're only getting about 100 cases, or down to 22 cases, I think, now in Hubei, deaths are still racking up. Of course, those are pre-existing patients, but they seem to have got a handle on it. So I think it's consistent of them to have this quarantine, because you've got to shut yourself off to the rest of the world, otherwise they're just going to bring it in again. So we'll see how things go in China in terms of that, and for this broadcast, I'll just give them the benefit of the doubt. And I want to get on to South Korea, but let me continue to the UK. They were saying on Sky News, and it's in the papers, I believe it's in The Guardian tomorrow, that because there are going to be a shortage of respirators, doctors are going to have to make the decision to give respirators to the people who have the most chance of survival. So just to let you know, that's kind of euthanasia. Doctors are going to be playing God and deciding who has the most case of survival and moving respirators to them. So if you've ever thought euthanasia wasn't alive and well in Great Britain, you should think again, particularly as there is already something called the Liverpool Care Pathway, which is kind of euthanasia, but with another name, and that's been going on for many, many years. But I think, bearing in mind that there is this problem where the elderly are much more likely to become infected and get seriously ill with this, especially people over 80, but anyone over 60 with pre-existing health conditions. I think the government should be more honest and say that if you are elderly or pre-existing, you should be extremely cautious. You should basically stay at home, stay away from public places, because there are not enough respirators. And I think that needs to be said all in one sentence, because if you have any problems, you're going to put yourself in a position where they might just decide you're not getting the respirator and someone else is. So just bear that in mind. I was very happy. One thing that impressed me in the Trump news conference in the Rose Garden is he said he'd ordered lots more respirators. That was the most significant thing for me that came out of all that waffle. That's huge. All this about testing kits, this testing kits, that. Yeah, what about the care for people who do get it? Look how many people at that old age home or the Life Care Center in Kirkland, in Seattle, have died. I think we're going to see, a very high death rate from that. It's already over 50%, I should say, a death rate from the Life Care Center. So that was reassuring about the respirators. Okay, I'm confused about this whole testing thing. It seems America are having an extremely hard time getting their act together with the testing kits. From the press conference in the Rose Garden, President Trump talked about working with Roche, in order to get more test kits on the market. Last week, Pence was talking about a number of regulations that would be relaxed, working with local governments, the federal government working with the state government, everything they're doing to increase testing. And still, testing is not happening on a significant scale in America. I don't know if that's got to do with their private healthcare system or what. I really can't explain it, but it seems to me rather odd that Italy had so many test kits. The United Kingdom has managed to test something like 30,000 people. They seem to have these test kits at the ready. And South Korea had plenty of test kits, as did China. I mean, quite amazingly, China from the get-go was able to test people very effectively. So why is it such a problem for America to get their act together and start testing people? Because it seems it's not happening. Or we can look at the opposite way and say maybe these other countries who tell us that they've done so much testing are either using an inferior test kit, a very quick-to-market test kit, or, I don't know. Think for yourself, guys, but ask yourself, what's going on with this testing? And how on earth did China, the UK, and Italy manage to get so many test kits all ready to use so quickly, but America can't? It's either a big failing for America or there's something they are not telling us about the whole testing procedure. Maybe it's not like for like in each country. Maybe some countries are doing it in a very different way, therefore they're getting very different results. I really would like to see a full report on the comparison of the actual test kits and testing to find out what is really going on there. So the markets are in free fall, of course. I hear Norwegian Air is calling for a bailout, not in those terms, but they need help because they're on the brink. There was a report that British Airways, Simon Calder writing The Guardian, said British Airways are facing a very steep uphill, especially if Trump does put the travel ban on the UK, which I think is highly likely. I just wonder if he'll say to Boris, look, I'll leave you out of the travel ban, but do you sort out that thing with Huawei? Because I know Trump and Boris have an ongoing spat about this country giving Huawei the contract for 5G. So maybe he'll put that on the table, hey? The odd of the deal could be. But I do think it's highly likely that UK are going to come under the ban, which is going to put British Airways under a lot of pressure. So we're seeing all the airlines, the cruise industry, the holiday industry, just, having an awful time. And the funny thing is the gold price has been dropping. Bitcoin has lost 40% of its value, which is strange. Where are people putting their money? They're taking it out of the market. They're not necessarily putting it in gold, which is always the kind of safe haven for money when there are these sort of crises. Anglo-American stocks were one of the biggest fallers on Thursday, so it's definitely not money going into metals. So there's something really bizarre going on here. It's not surprising to me the stock market's dropping. We've got a demand shock, a supply shock, a productivity shock. There's just so much going on. People are totally changing their habits. So obviously, if you view share price as a discounted measure of future earnings expectation is way down, therefore the price of shares has to go down. But also, isn't this a wonderful opportunity for the people with the deepest pockets to clean up? because the people with the deepest pockets can afford to take a hit, and then they can still got cash available to buy up shares at discount prices and consolidate their power, which is what I kind of said in the Vulcanist agenda. It's all about the power going to the top, about more and more money accumulating at the top, and about worldwide a huge gap developing between the haves and the have-nots, and the middle class being put on the back foot, which you can also see happening with that big impact that all small businesses are going to be taking. So you can see coming out of this crisis, it's the biggest businesses that will be more likely to survive and will have less competition. So we might be seeing less choice and more power in the hands of certain people who we may not necessarily want to have that power. So, let's see. Yeah, I talked about the testing. South Korean cases have really gone down, but one explanation for that was before, when South Korea were testing, all their testing was focused on the outbreak at the Daegu Church, which was in a province of South Korea. And so it was really easy for them to test because they had a target. You know, they knew that so many cases were connected to that particular region. So tests were kind of, focused on that region, which meant they were catching all the cases. However, the example is similar. Say, for example, you walk down Oxford Street and you ask 100 people if they're a fan of Man United. Well, you'll get a certain sample will be. But if you ask 100 people at a Man United game at Old Trafford if they're a fan of Man United, you're going to get a much higher proportion. So that's kind of South Korea. They were showing up so many cases because they were testing in exactly the right places. So now that the outbreak in that Daegu province has subsided, maybe their testing is not as focused or not as targeted, so they're not picking up all the cases, and that is what could have led to the decline. Because as I remember, South Korea didn't do any travel bans, they weren't doing massive closures of things or social distancing, they weren't doing any of the measures that Italy and Spain are now doing, and yet they got control over it. So there's also a big question mark about how exactly they achieved it and whether it's sustainable. Of course, it's spread nearly everywhere now. Many countries in Africa that were untouched have now got cases. Countries in South America, Brazil is expanding quite rapidly. Even places like Panama. Obviously, everywhere in Europe is in the grip of it. And even the Scandinavian countries, who you'd think are less populated, who are purported to have very good healthcare systems, and who have generally, would you say, very much socialized care. Everyone always tells us that they're a great model for socialism. Well, I don't agree. I think it's just they have a lot of public services and high taxes. But we told how well their healthcare system does, and yet they don't seem to be getting a grip on this. So it's kind of interesting. As I say, Australian cases are moving up, and I like to watch all the hot countries because they tell us that in the heat it's less virulent. But it seems now cases all over the Australasia area and all the countries just between Australia and Asia, so we're talking about Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, all of those seem to be on the march along with the South American countries who are now going into their winter, so you never know. You guys might have seen on the Daily Mail that there's a link between having this virus and a drop in fertility in men, which they say in China. So conspiratorially, you could say, well, I guess that's convenient for the people who would like to see a population reduction because more men get it than women, they say. Based on the Chinese stats, and now there's an impact on fertility. I did say to you about 2 weeks ago that I thought Spain was going to be the next big place to take off with this virus, unfortunately, and that seems to be happening. I'm very interested to know how this will impact Spanish and Italian politics, because as you know, Salvini was kind of pushed out, and we now have the coalition between Five Star and a kind of centre-left party. We wonder if this will, and of course we've got Podemos in Spain, which is a left-wing party, socialist party. So we wonder how they're going to handle it, those particular parties, and if it's going to really impact them in terms of the polls and elections going forward, because Spain has an unstable coalition. They've had 4 elections in 4 years. I think it's less than that. So we could see a political shake-up after the dust has settled from this in both Italy and Spain, depending on how well people feel that they've dealt with it. Obviously not well. So it could put those particular coalitions that are now in place in Italy and Spain in jeopardy, and we could see some political change there coming up. I notice, I don't know if you guys would agree, I haven't seen a lot of sniping from Labour or the Democrats in America. It seems they don't want to stick their neck out and be wrong, so they rather are waiting, holding back just keeping quiet, hoping Trump and Boris will make a big mistake, rather than weighing in with their own opinions. They have been rather quiet on this, although you would hope they would be quiet. It's not a time during a crisis like this to politically score points. Trump was talking about working with Google in order to set up this website to facilitate people assessing themselves, finding out where to go to a drive-through testing center, etc., etc. Google is saying, no, they're not developing this website. A bit of confusion over that. However, how difficult can it be to set up a website that does that in this day and age? It's been a long time since any Joe Soap could buy an off-the-shelf website creation program and make a website. Obviously, this is more technical, but then again, my gosh, I mean, surely Google is capable of the complexities of this, or someone is. As you know from the start, I said that this could be a drill. Occasionally, I'm still thinking in that vein, partially because every country is taking very different responses. They had quite a good map on one of the newspaper websites of the different measures different countries are taking. And, so that might be the drill playing out. And did you notice Bill Gates announced he's stepping down from Google and he's going to devote his time to philanthropy full time? And of course, as you know, he was involved in this event 201, which was scenario building for an epidemic crisis like this. So that's also kind of interesting to play in the mix and to just wonder about, and to, bit of a conspiracy. So those are my thoughts, and I'm sorry I haven't done the main astrology-based analysis. And as I say, some people said to me, oh, you're being too hard on China, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you don't know. I had some comment from someone who said, oh, he watches me occasionally to see if I've improved, but I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, I'm sorry, I do realize there are some people out there who like to subscribe to the worldview that everything is a Zionist plot and everything stems out of sort of a conspiracy between the CIA, certain people in America, and the Zionists, and they are responsible for everything that's happened in history, and that indeed China was set up by certain, certain moneyed elites in America who are trying a big experiment. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to accept that. As you know, I did talk about how the Bolsheviks were funded from New York and were almost an experiment in my blog called Why Capitalists Love Communism. So I'm really open to the idea that the Tricoms are a construct of some branch of the American elites. I'm open to debating that and to accepting that as an argument. But at the same time, if the Chinese are doing things, whether they're doing it totally of their own volition, where everything is their idea, if they do it, it's on them. I mean, if someone pays me to do something and puts an idea in my head and I act it out, it's still on me because I did it. So I don't think we can turn a blind eye and say, well, you mustn't be hard on China because everything they do is by design, by some powerful elite group. And I think that's taking away that, first of all, it could be conspiratorial. And secondly, it's still on them what they're doing. And I think there's different views of what's going on in China. And I know that some people, I've seen them on Facebook, like to have a very favorable opinion of everything that goes on in China, Russia, Iran, whatever, and a very unfavorable view of everything that happens in America. And it's impossible to keep everyone happy, but I think it would be naive to think that everything going down in China has been 100% kosher and it's all 100% hunky-dory. So, you just can't have the full facts on everything, and not everything can be laid down in a neat little box to one specific conspiracy. And some people might want to think of it that way, but I don't think you really can. So thanks, guys. Plenty more coming in this vein soon, as it's an unfolding and unprecedented situation.